Just think about it. 50 years ago, 4 out of 5 Chinese worked in the fields, and 96% of Chinese live below the poverty line. And today, China produces almost a third of all goods on the planet, starts trade wars, and participates in the space race with Russia and the United States. And all this under the rule of the Communist Party and the absence of broad democracy. How has China managed to overtake those who, it seemed, were simply impossible to catch up with in the last 30 years? Let's dive into the unique story of how the oldest of the living empires is winning back its dominion. So you listen to this story about socialism with a Chinese face, and you probably think, well, they allowed small businesses to open the borders for investors, and even gave them tax breaks. But many countries did the same in the late 80s and early 90s. However, for some reason, China became the world's first economy. What is its secret? The fact is that as soon as China opened up to the whole world, giants such as Coca-Cola and General Motors immediately rushed to the Celestial Empire because the prospects outweighed all the risks. Firstly, it has the cheapest labor, and secondly, it has a huge sales market, which must be captured faster than others. But the Chinese trick is that until the mid-80s, the only way foreigners could start a business in China was a joint venture with a local manufacturer. The foreign side provided capital and technology, and the Chinese took on the legal registration, logistics, and recruitment of personnel, including top management. And it turned out that China, in fact, is not going to be a sales market for anyone. It wants to become a world factory itself, which will supply goods to all corners of the planet, just like in the period before the Opium Wars. And when Western companies entered China, the local business very carefully adopted the experience of their foreign colleagues and simply copied their technologies for itself. This is the simplest and not at all rare way to catch up with the leaders. Remember at least the first Soviet cars. Most of them were built on the basis of American and Italian cars. And if you look at the 2003 Chevrolet Spark from the American company General Motors and the Chinese Cherry Cuckoo 2006, you will hardly find 10 differences there. But China, it did not just copy technologies once, it put this process on stream. And we are not even talking about Chinese counterfeits of clothes or bags of famous brands. For example, in 2013, the FBI reported that Chinese companies were trying to bring from the United States genetically modified corn seeds, which increase crop yields. And Tesla in 2020 accused its former employee of stealing the autopilot self-learning technology and passing it on to Chinese competitors. This policy of copying helped China not to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on its own developments, but to immediately jump over 10 to 20 years of research and catch up with market leaders. China's investments in research and development grew rapidly in the 2000s and soon overtook the countries from which China had previously taken technology, Japan and the European Union. And as if that were not enough, the Communist Party gives priority to Chinese companies when issuing benefits and subsidies, regardless of whether they are private or state-owned. Foreigners have received from the Chinese government over the past 20 years tens of times fewer benefits than local enterprises. In general, thanks to cheap labor, borrowing technology, and government support, Chinese companies were able not only to produce cheap products and squeeze competitors out of the market, but even absorb some of them. For example, in 2010, the Chinese automaker Geely bought out the Swedish company Volvo Cars, and the Chinese technology corporation Lenovo acquired smartphone manufacturer Motorola from Google in 2014. But here's an even more interesting story. In the early 2000s, China purchased high-speed trains and technology from leading Western companies, such as Germany's Siemens and France's Alstom. For China, which stretches from east to west for thousands of kilometers, the development of high-speed railways was vital. And already in 2007, the main Chinese railway company introduced its first high-speed train. Thanks to its huge domestic market, by 2015, the Chinese manufacturer began to produce more products than the Siemens and Alstom divisions, which deal with railways put together. It reached the point of absurdity The German state monopoly Deutsche Bahn expressed a desire to buy Chinese trains instead of German ones because they were simply cheaper and no worse in quality. Frightened by China's expansion into their markets, the French and German companies tried to merge their railway enterprises. However, the European Union prohibited this, fearing the creation of a large monopoly. And what about the Chinese company? Well, today it is the largest railway company in the world by revenue. In general, if in the 2000s, the world leader in the most important technological research was the United States, today China has begun to take its place. From the production of electric cars to the launch of applications that capture the attention of audiences all over the world. Naturally, the United States began to snap back. In 2016, Donald Trump introduced anti-dumping duties against foreign steel products and imposed a separate duty of 266% on Chinese products.
On the national security of the United States. It's not just the pricing, it's not just employment, it also has to do with the national security of our country.
And in 2022, Joe Biden banned the import of products from the Chinese telecom company Huawei into the United States.
I've made sure that the most advanced American technologies can't be used in China, not allowing to trade them there.
And to understand why the United States is so excited about China, it is enough to look at the structure of the Celestial Empire's GDP. Almost 40% of China's economy is in the manufacturing sector, which creates goods for the entire world. And such rates of expansion of Chinese capital threaten the closure of American and European enterprises and the monopoly of the Celestial Empire in key sectors of the world economy. But what is ironic here is that the main consumers of Chinese exports are precisely the European Union and the United States. And here we have a vicious circle. On the one hand, Europe and the United States are worried that China will squeeze their companies out of their most important markets, but at the same time, they cannot completely abandon cheap Chinese goods simply because it is profitable. But on the other hand, China is also interested in solvent buyers, because in China, domestic consumption accounts for only 53% of GDP, while in developed countries, this share is 70 or even 80%. And when a country can consume most of its manufactured products itself, this is a sign of a stable economy. But for China, this indicator has not only not grown, but has been declining over the past 2 decades. And not the least reason for this is that the confrontation between China and the United States has resulted not just in a trade war between them, but in a competition to see who will be the fastest to seize third world countries. That is why China gives Sri Lanka loans to modernize ports. And then, when the country cannot repay the loan, China, according to the agreement, receives these ports on lease for 99 years. Thus, China creates for itself an excellent foothold in the Indian Ocean, both commercial and military. And this in turn puts a spoke in the wheel of India, which traditionally considers the Indian Ocean its area of interest. And right now, at the expense of the Celestial Empire, a new Silk Road is being built, a trade route that should envelop all of Eurasia, all so that China does not have to use the expensive and unreliable route through the Suez Canal, but fully control the price of its goods in the main trading points of the planet. However, in every barrel of Chinese honey, there is a fly in the ointment. It is one thing to catch up with the leaders and another to compete with them for first place. After all, when you are lagging behind, it is very easy to quickly grow by copying technologies and the low base effect. Due to this, the Chinese economy steadily grew by 8% or more per year in the 2000s. But in recent years, its growth rate is comparable to the growth rate of the American economy, because now it has to invent new technologies itself and spend resources on the fight for markets. In addition, China's population has decreased in the last 2 years. Believe it or not, from 1950 to 2023, China was the most populous country on the planet, but today it has been overtaken by India. The reason for this is not only the global trend of population aging in developed countries, but also the consequences of the one family, one child policy, which was introduced in China in 1979. Then the party introduced taxes and fines for the birth of a second and subsequent children in a family. This was planned to raise the standard of living because the economy seemed to be growing, But the population grew even faster and ate up all this growth. The one family, one child policy did produce some positive but short-term consequences. However, today we can already say that it turned out to be ineffective. The decline in the birth rate in China has increased the aging of the population and the burden on the state budget. After all, no one canceled pensions and benefits, and with such a policy, the number of old people became larger. And in many families, women had abortions if they knew that a girl would be born. After all, everyone needed an heir. As a result, today in China, there is not only a shortage of young workforce in some industries, but also a gender imbalance when men cannot find a wife. Yes, in 2015, China allowed people to have 2 children, and in 2021, 3. But the birth rate is in no hurry to increase. As a result, it turns out that China serves the whole world, but at the same time has big problems with domestic demand, which we talked about above. This imbalance manifests itself, for example, in the fact that entire ghost districts with already built houses are periodically demolished throughout the country. In addition, the standard of living in China has grown over the past 30 years, which means that the standard of workers has become more and more expensive. And today, China, with all its market problems and features of socialist governance, no longer looks so attractive in the eyes of investors. Companies like Intel, Nike, Microsoft declare their desire to move part of their production from China to somewhere where labor is cheaper or the environment is calmer, to the same Bangladesh, Mexico, or Vietnam. And indeed, if we look at foreign direct investment in China, we will see that for the first time in 25 years, investors' money is flowing out of China. And so, looking at the history of the Celestial Empire and understanding how it ended up in its current position, I want to ask, what will happen to China next? Will it grow inexorably, capturing the entire world? Or will its short-lived leadership soon end due to Western sanctions and domestic problems? Who will be the world's economic leader tomorrow? China, which has just risen from the ashes? The United States, which has long been sitting on this Olympus? Or maybe young India, which is already gaining muscle? It seems that today this is one of the most interesting questions in the world economy and geopolitics, the answer to which we will probably find out in the next decade.